Hi guys, Fred Galvan Jr. here again, and welcome to episode 3 of the Alton school bus accident. I know it's been a while since the last episode, but again, we got pretty busy and also spent so much time trying to repair some of the mishaps during principal photography of this series. If it's your first time here, then I'll briefly explain what happened. When I actually got to sit down with our special guest, all the video equipment started to malfunction. The cameras constantly kept going out of focus. Our special guest's microphone stopped working. Mine stopped working. The cameras would suddenly stop recording. We had to go back and re-record some of the content over and over again. It was crazy. I even re-recorded myself while I'm here when I got back into my studio. You're gonna see a lot of back and forth on the next 2 episodes. The fresh batteries on the cameras would run out quickly, like that. I cracked my tooth during the interview. We started thinking that maybe this story took a life of its own and refused to cooperate. Maybe it just didn't want to be told. I don't know. But we kept insisting and telling the story. Needless to say, you will see plenty of production mishaps as the series continues, so please bear with us. On this episode, we will break down what happened after the accident. When all these attorneys just showed up to South Texas known as the Rio Grande Valley, how these low-income families became almost overnight millionaires, and how this wealth came with an enormous amount of problems. And we will also let you in on a little secret that the general public knows nothing about. Only maybe some attorneys or some of the judges and maybe a few of those involved, but that's it. We will reveal this secret towards the end of the video. A little hint, it deals with a driver. Yep, that's it, that's all you get. Also, just a little heads up, a little disclaimer if you will. Some of the content discussed in this episode will probably upset you and maybe make your blood boil. At least that's what happened with us. But we're gonna go ahead and talk about it right after this. Pow! So, all right guys, so we're back. Now, last time we spoke about the specific date, September 21st, 1989. Now this is where things get a little bit different. But before we do that, I'd like to thank the Martinez Enterprise for sponsoring this video. Thank you guys are nothing short of amazing. I'd like to thank Dan Ochoa for helping out with this video, so thanks to him. And I'd like to thank Hell's Bells as well. So this is where it starts to get ugly and where you're probably gonna get upset, and understandably so. So let's get into it. So earlier we were discussing, last episode we discussed about the survivors having that guilt, wondering why not me. Some of them actually genuinely tried to help. I know Continental Airlines gave away 500 round-trip tickets to London to raise funds for the families of the bus accident. The tickets were given to the first 500 people to invest $100 or more. And I know you know about this because that Friday, the football game was canceled.
There was a 10,000 person memorial at Tom Landry Stadium. Mm-hmm. And so, people were gathered there, 10,000 people from all over the valley. There was poetry read. I think I included a poem in my book. But one of the stories that touched me was that they released 21 balloons.
At the time, Mission High School had a tradition of releasing balloons as its team was introduced. That week, however, it was decided that a black balloon would be released for each of the 21 students killed in the bus accident. Every 5 yards, someone stood with a balloon ready to release it whenever that student's name was called. Cito Ochoa Jr., then vice president of the Mission City Independent School District School Board, was the public announcer. From the press box, he remembers expecting each of the balloons to take off one by one with the wind. That's not what happened though. Ochoa watched as all of the balloons gathered at the center of the field and floated out together. He said, I don't have an explanation. I don't know how. A lot of people noticed it, that they left together.
For some reason, they all kind of gathered together in the field and floated up together, and everyone there just took it as they were together in heaven.
Yeah.
And that's just, that imagery, just sticks, it's amazing, it's an amazing story.
Yeah, because I do believe that after they would mention their name, they would release a balloon. Mm-hmm. So they weren't released at the same time. But sorry. I mean, physics would tell you that doesn't happen.
Yeah, maybe, if they were released at the same time, but you're correct, they were individually released.
Yeah, and somehow like the balloons managed to get into the middle. Mm-hmm. And then once the last one was released, like I said, these balloons were waiting for this last balloon, and then they all left together, where people were in shock. Mm-hmm. But it gave them a sense of comfort knowing that they were safe
together,
everywhere, somewhere else together. Mm-hmm. That is a wow kind of story. Friday night football game was canceled that week. The game the following week was not canceled.
When I'm guessing it was my sophomore year when all this happened. The next football game was in Donna High School. So the next football game was between Donna and Mission. I was in the marching band, and I was also in the loading crew. So that meant we helped get all the stuff down, packed them at the end. We'd always leave early from the game to open up all the instrument cases, so we can the kids can come, put it in, we load them back into the truck, and we take off. And it's something I wrote in my book, but it is really hard to describe other than you can, you felt something in the air. It was anger, animosity. It's really hard, but you just felt this in the atmosphere, the entire time you're there. And so we're playing, in the band, and you could see a fight break out here, a fight break out there, a fight break out over here. And I remember doing our halftime show and coming up, and normally in high school, our high school at least, you'd play the halftime show, and then third quarter, you were allowed to take a break to get something to eat. And so we were used to getting, we're done, let's go get something to eat. And our band director stopped us, and he's like, start loading the truck. We're going to leave. It's just, it's getting bad out here. Mm-hmm. And so we, because we're in the loading crews, so we went, they got to go get food or whatever, but we ran, to go get so we're getting everything down. And by this point, I guess the cheerleaders and the Diettes, which are the dancing, also are decided, it's time to leave. So we, packed everything up. And at the time, and I've asked kids since, and this has nothing to do with the Alton thing, but it has to do with what we did in the bus. I've asked kids that are in band now, because I teach at a high school, and they told me that's not a big deal anymore. But when I went to high school, it was a big deal that people would throw rocks to the bus. It just happened. Mm-hmm. So we got in the habit of our uniform bags, which are basically, just those suit bags. We got in the habit, we'd always put them in the windows in case something. And then that time, we were doing that, we were reminded to do that, but then they were telling people that had instruments that you carried, I played a clarinet, so the case is this big. Mm-hmm. So you carried that on, you didn't put it in the truck. Mm-hmm. That people with those things to put them in the window as well. So we were all we were literally riding with our hand holding our cases in the windows, and we did hear rocks. And when we got to the high school, there was an ambulance waiting there because someone shot, I think, a pellet gun, and the glass went into one of the dancers, the Diet's eye.
So Juan, but this is not your first experience of death involving a school bus. Mm-hmm. Something else happened when you were younger, and you didn't even tell your dad. Is that correct?
Yeah,
take us to walk us through it.
Well, if I remember correctly, because I was with my cousin, so I had to call him, and when I got a hold of him, he helped me fill in gaps. It's not something I think about a lot, but when I hear people I just can't remember that. A traumatic experience, and they talk about, can you describe this? When women, unfortunately have to describe rape, and they're oh, I can't remember this, but I can remember this. I feel for them because I get that, because all I can remember, this is what my memory is, and I have to fill it in with what he tells me. My memory is we're walking along Old Highway 83 in Donna. The area would be if you're sitting on Highway 83 and staring north where the high school is. If you're in Donna, you can shoot straight and you'll see the high school. at that time that there was a corner store. I think it's I think they sell like Dulceria or something right now. Dulce is like Mexican.
It wasn't the store. I remember a store around that area, but it might have been on the next one.
Well, there's a car. No, Greg's was further. Greg's was up on Main, I think. Okay. There's a car wash, and then there's if you're going from west to east, you'll pass a car wash on your right, then you'll see that building. Yep. We're passing there, and I think it was 11 or 12. And a school bus, just like right as it passes us, the emergency exit flies open, and a kid falls out and literally cracks his head right at our feet. I can still see it as I'm saying it right now. And I remember we froze. My cousin had more wits than I, and he turned to run to the I guess the cashier, whoever's working in the store, and he said, "What's going on?" He's like, "You need to call police." And there's no 911 back then. And the guy's like, "I don't know the number." And I can hear my cousin yelling, the number of the police and to call. And that's the last memory I have. I don't remember anything after that. So he helped me fill in the gaps, is that we were there, and we were witnesses to an accident, and the cops dismissed us, just go home. Like, didn't take our testimony, nothing. I don't remember this. So he says that we just continued walking to my house, that we went into my room and we prayed for him, and then my grandpa picked him up and he went. I don't remember any of this.
Wow.
I remember nothing. Just that, like as I said it, that instant, that's all I remember. And so I put that in the beginning of my book because, like I said, that's my tie to bus accidents. And I'll never forget the phone call from my dad. "Why didn't you tell me?" I'm like, "Dad, I don't remember anything beyond that it happened." Later on, I tell this to she was, at the time, she might still be there. She was head of the transportation department at San Benito. And she wanted me to come talk to her bus drivers. And she asked a question like, "Well, how did you get into this?" And I told her that very story. And she said that boy's dad was a bus driver there in Donna.
Wow. Like, what are the odds?
And she worked in Donna before, so she worked with him when that happened.
Governor Clements came down earlier that year for Mark Kilroy, but did not come down for this accident. Governor Clements came down that same, came down that year, but not for this event. Okay. He came down for the Mark Kilroy situation that happened in March. The spring breaker who, was sacrificed in Matamoros, right across from Brownsville. Just so you all understand, spring break here in the Rio Grande Valley, it's South Padre Island is part of the Rio Grande Valley. A lot of what we call spring breakers, they come to South Padre Island and they have a good time, and it's not far from Matamoros where you can drink at any age. A lot of these kids are not of age, plus it's a whole lot cheaper. They go and they party. This kid was abducted, and you explained it very well in your book, because there were certain parts I didn't understand, but you filled it in very well in your book. He was eventually pretty much abducted or kidnapped, and he was sacrificed for the sake of profit for these.
Supposedly he was using his power to mask the drugs so they could cross over. I mean, it turns out later that he knew people at the checkpoint and stuff, but that was his supposedly connection to the cartel, that he was using his powers to do this. And Payo Mayombe, which is the religion that he was following, you put like animal blood in a bowl. And I guess his logical leap is that gives me power, then human blood will give me more power. And then it was like, a white kid will be even more power, and that was literally his undoing, because he'd been killing people for a while and nothing came of it. Kill one white kid from UT Austin and the whole world comes looking for you.
Yeah.
And a little side note is, it turned out later, one of my former students, one of my former debaters that I keep in contact with, she just texted me out of the blue one time, "Do you know who Mark Kilroy is?" I'm like, "Yes." And then she's like, "He was killed on my family farm." She had no idea, I guess she hadn't heard the story. She said, like, "I remember my grandmother, I think it was like curandera or something, and people looked at her, but there was apparently all kinds of other stuff going on around that she had no clue about."
Wow. Coincidence.
Yeah. But what's funny is 1989, so much was, and that was one major story. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, in December, and those trials are happening in 1989. There was a building in Brownsville called the Amigo store, and there was a lot of rain that collected and it pancaked down, killing a lot of people. So those lawsuits are going through the courts. Then the Alton lawsuits are going, and this comes into play today with the lawsuit caps that have caused havoc in Texas. So we can get into that a little later. But yeah, there was a lot of stuff going in 89, and you're quite right. I'm sorry, I was like, no, he didn't. But yeah, he comes down for Mark Kilroy, but 21 children die, and he sends a team over, but he doesn't come down.
Right, and actually, so when they asked him, it's like, why didn't you go down? You went down for Mark Kilroy, but you didn't go down for the Alton school bus accident. Why? And he said, because it wasn't a criminal matter. Is that justification? I don't know, maybe, but...
Well, it was. Ruben Pettis they indicted him 21 counts of manslaughter. How is that not a criminal...
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I agree with you, but it's just like that, like come on, man. You know, it's just, does it have anything to do with their last name or the color of their skin? You know, and that does bother me. And I knew this way before I started researching this. It was one of the first things that came to mind when I first started researching this. And
you know what? And you think, okay, you had ABC News. You had this was national attention. Wouldn't a governor want to get his face in a camera where national and it just yeah. It frustrates.
Yeah, no, it is frustrating, and so, but what he did do, he appointed a task force to probe the bus crash led by his chief lawyer, Ryder Scott. So now I don't know what the purpose of that was, exactly what they did.
I honestly have no idea what, if anything, came from it, because I know the changes came from other places.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I say, what did he do? Because all the research I've done, they've never mentioned ever this group that this Ryder Scott put together. I don't get it, but okay. Let's talk about Coca-Cola that was willing to pay out whatever amount for families as long as they were lawyered out. Can you walk me through that?
Okay. When the accident happened, and it just the only person in management who spoke Spanish was Julie Martinez, who turned out to be my dad's cousin, and she provided me with the memos and also the ledger. Basically, because she spoke Spanish, she would be the front person to talk with the families, and basically she was given instructions. She was given a checkbook and a log, a ledger, and she was to set up and just write checks for any of the families for whatever they needed. As long as they hadn't gotten a lawyer. And when you look at the checkbook and you look at the ledger, and you'll see, people coming in, you feel kind of like, wow, these are the things they're asking for, like school supplies because they lost everything, clothing, there was some like jewelry in there, but one of them that popped up a lot was lost wages, because you're looking at people who had jobs that if they lost a day, they lost a day's pay. Their employer wasn't going to help them out, so that they're out for 2-3 days, funerals, investigations, and it hurt them. So, she was writing checks for lost wages. She was writing checks for plane tickets so family members could fly in to come to the funerals, to help them pay the bills, to help them pay rent. You can see, a list of all kinds of different goods and services that she helped paid for. No real questions asked. They asked, she wrote it. The only caveat was once they got a lawyer, she couldn't do it anymore. And I guess the thinking behind that is like, they're going to get money anyway. Might as well put it in there.
Yeah.
So, but it was, to me, I was really surprised to hear that. I think evil corporation, whether they were, but just the fact that like they immediately, let's just start paying out. And they paid all the medical bills. They paid, I think, the funeral services as well.
Yeah. They did pay all the funeral services.
They paid for all that. So, say what you will, but yeah, I was surprised that they did those things.
Right. That's interesting. They stepped up. So very nice. But now,
and also psychologist bills.
What started off with funerals and memorial services at the high school stadium in the San Juan Basilica soured into a stampede of lawyers. Some came as far from Dallas, Texas, and other states. If they didn't come themselves, they sent their representatives, aka they call them runners. Eladio Valverde, a local pastor who preached at the Tom Landry Stadium, remembers the lawyers who attended the event. Some of them even handed him their business cards. It's no wonder, he said, that families have tried to insulate themselves. Some lawyers even went to the hospital. Dora Rodriguez had a 3-inch stack of lawyer business cards within the first week of losing her only daughter. Carmen Cruz was courted by half a dozen lawyers. One lawyer gave her $5,000 and promised to help her buy a new house. Another helped her buy a new GMC Suburban that sat outside her dilapidated home. Hidalgo County District Attorney Rene Guerra tried to go after attorneys who attempted to bribe potential clients with money, vehicles, and even homes to get them to sign contracts. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Juan, but at one point, some of these lawyers were bribing these kids with these beautiful sport cars, kind of like, do you like it? Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I understand is there was do you like that car? It's like, yeah, well, it's yours. All you got to do is sign right here. How accurate is that, or am I far away from it?
From what I understand, the sports cars came with the money that came afterwards, but I can tell you one story, that one of them was at his house and he gets a knock on the door of his cousin saying this lawyer wants to talk to you, and he goes over there, and mind you, him and his sister were in the accident together and they already had a lawsuit going, but this guy managed to pull him away so that and tell him, I'll get you money, I'll get you an apartment. You're an 18-year-old kid, and that caused animosity in the family for a while.
Wow. Oh, in the family, that's worse.
Because why did you go over here and get your own money? And yeah. They patched it up since, but at that time it was a big deal. But just to show you that they did come, it was funny. They sent his cousin to go talk to him, to take him to a lawyer's house.
Yeah, it's a bit sleazy, slimy. First lawsuit was filed 4 days after the accident. Lawyers started disputing each other as to who was going to represent families. All of us are fighting each other like sharks at a feeding frenzy, said San Antonio attorney Ruben Sandoval, who was disputing with the McAllen attorney Mark Cantu as to who is going to represent one of the families. We know that Ruben Sandoval was the head of LULAC in the San Antonio chapter.
He was the lawyer for the president.
Walk us through that.
Yeah, Jose de Lara was the president of that chapter, and that was his lawyer. And I believe he was the lawyer for LULAC as well. And according to Sandoval's papers, because he wrote several letters trying to explain what happened, that he had heard that people were, Mexican Americans were being taken advantage of, and LULAC is the premier civil rights organization for Mexican Americans. So he felt he was going to send his lawyer and some people down to help out these people, make sure they're not being taken advantage of. But it's at that point that Ruben acquires a couple of clients at that same time, which seems suspicious for a lot of people, including Mark Cantu. Is was he sent here for that, or to help out? And suddenly he has clients, and so they sue each other over who owns those clients. And Ruben Sandoval's involvement in this whole thing put a spotlight on some of the issues inside that chapter of LULAC, and it turned out because they were looking into them, they looked deeper and they found some missing monies. I think it was $30,000, and they ended up having to dissolve the chapter and reintegrate it later. And it's just amazing how that one, it dragged the whole thing down. And it was just shocking to, you think about LULAC one way and then just see all these, things play themselves out, even they, or maybe Ruben Sandoval, but there's always people saying he was ordered maybe by Jose de Lara, was he ordered to do that or not? Jose de Lara, denies it, but the fact is he did come down. And another thing that seemed a little, I guess, shady, but I can understand the argument actually does kind of make sense, is that the group that was with Ruben Sandoval felt so bad for some of these people that they were just giving them cash. they felt like, well, to help them out. But to other people, it looked like they were kind of like bribing them over.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so, there's a lot of gray, misconceptions.
It's very gray right there,
Yeah.
Juan. Okay, and I do know that later on, and I don't know the exact details, I do know, I have a note somewhere that Mr. Sandoval later on represented one of the families, a single mother. And what he did is he even lowered his percentage that they keep, 33%. The what number, I don't know, but he did bring it down so more money can go to the mom. Manrique's family filed a harassment complaint against San Antonio lawyer Roberto Guerra, but then dropped it. Guerra allegedly offered the Manrique's family $700 to keep him involved in their case against the Coca-Cola company. The harassment complaint was filed by their new attorney, Jose M. Martinez. Martinez was then accused of misrepresenting himself to a second family. Juan and Imelda Lopez, who met Martinez as they searched for their daughter Ruby. Well, they were obviously unsuccessful in finding her at hospitals and morgues. According to a deposition, Mr. Martinez then offered to help find their daughter on the condition that they signed on the dotted line, authorizing him to help search for Ruby. They signed. They eventually found their 12-year-old Ruby in a morgue. It turns out the paper they signed was a contract authorizing Martinez to represent them in the lawsuit. Later, on a phone interview, Jose Martinez said that he went over the entire contract with the family, carefully explaining it before they signed it. They later discharged Martinez, hired and fired a local law firm, Flores, Munoz, Hakima, and Reed. They eventually decided on San Antonio attorney Ruben Sandoval and his co-counsel Jim Perkins. Flores, Munoz, Hakima, and Reed sued Sandoval and Perkins, accusing them of stealing representation of the Lopez family, which then Sandoval and Perkins filed a countersuit for slander. One mother told the district attorney's office that a lawyer offered to buy her a new house if she signed his contract. In Texas, a lawyer may advance a loan against the eventual verdict or settlement, but cannot make such arrangements or even offer it until a contract is signed. Anything less is against the law. To make matters worse, some families were fooled and conned into signing contracts that gave the lawyer as much as 45%, which is in excess of the usual 33%.
When I was reading into it, you're looking at contracts, and it's brought up by different people, but I can back away from it. But yes, it did happen that they were exploited because a lot of them didn't speak English. But on top of that, I know personally as myself, I don't know what a normal rate for a lawyer is. So even if they spoke English and they'd never been involved in a lawsuit, which probably none of them had, they were still taking advantage, even if they didn't know how much, is normally charged. And most of these guys knew that this wasn't going to go to court. And so they were taking as much of a chunk as they could, because they make more money actually if they go to court. They charge a bigger percentage. Mm-hmm. But they knew it wasn't going to go to court, so they increased their percentages, knowing that these people probably didn't, even if they spoke English, understand what a normal percentage was. Plus they're in crisis, and they're not thinking straight. They've just lost a loved one. And in the case of that, even being able to find a loved one at one point, but in the case of that lawyer signed here, and it's sad that they just really took advantage of the situation, whether it was a language barrier or not understanding law, and they're in grief, and I would imagine after so much harassment, you just sign anything.
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine okay, just leave me alone.
Yeah, let me just sign, because otherwise, they're
going to keep coming.
They're going to keep coming, and it's just like, let's just sign once and for all.
Yeah. It literally was harassment. I mean, phone calls, people knocking on their doors. I mean, you're not just looking at lawyers, reporters. I mean, and in a time when a family is in a tragedy, you don't want to talk to strangers. You don't want to just leave us alone. And you can imagine, all that working itself into is the 10th time someone stuck a paper in my face. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know how annoying they can be, because I remember what I do for a living. I do video production, and on LinkedIn or any kind of social media, I try to get in communication, or I try to follow other filmmakers or these television reporters or journalists, because you learn from these people. Mm-hmm. And there was a few of them that I tried to friend on LinkedIn and on Facebook, and they wouldn't accept me. Now, we had a family tragedy about 2 years ago, and now they're contacting me, because they wanted to know the story, how it happened. It made headlines, and I'm not going to go into the details of it, but it's like, kind of low. Yeah. So going back as far as to what lawyers, the percentage of the lawyers, what I understand is 33%. I learned that from John Grisham books, and I have a friend of mine who's an attorney. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about his work very often, but it's 33%. Mm-hmm. And these guys were taking away like 45%.
If I could say one thing when it comes to like trying to talk to lawyers, without saying names, I just remember I had a former student that was working with some lawyers, and there was some legal questions I had, and he said no one wanted to answer them. Just legal questions that came up when I was writing the book, and he was like, nobody wants to answer those questions.
What? You're serious?
Yes, I'm very serious.
Wow. It's like you have to become a lawyer to learn to be crooked. Yeah. There were some good lawyers out there, I'm sure, but some of them were not. And you said that at one of your readings that you ran into some of these lawyers that walk us through that.
Yeah, two of my readings, in two different readings, I was approached by two different lawyers, and they seemed genuinely moved. Like they said, they just never have been able to get those cases out of their head. And you could see these were good guys, that they were generally trying to do good. They're local, for one thing. And so you read all this barratry stuff, but then seeing their genuineness in their faces, and they told me thank you for keeping the story alive, and because it's just something that they're having to live with, because when you see their looks on your faces, you can see these guys genuinely were connected to those families. Like it wasn't a dollar sign for them. So they're not all bad, but yes, when you look at the history and how bad it was, lawsuits going, people being sued because one person got more money for their kid than the other person, and there was countersuits and suits upon suits. It was so bad that the American Bar Association sent an emergency crisis team to investigate how much barratry was going on here.
Wow. Coca-Cola attached to the case its own lawsuit contending that Bluebird's bus design and the dangerous intersection at the Alton contributed to the deaths. Coca-Cola argues that if the soft drink company is found liable for damages, then the Bluebird Corporation and the city of Alton should pay a share. The city of Alton at the time's yearly budget was $600,000. In some cases, attorneys even sued other attorneys over their right to sue. Alton sued the Texas Department of Transportation, alleging that the state agency had failed to put up guardrails to prevent vehicles from falling into the pit. Who would be in charge of covering that up?
Well, we'll back up a little bit and understand that Alton's full of pits, even to this day. And I want to say a couple of weeks before the bus accident, two teenage boys had fallen in a pit already and died. And so the city was already talking about, we should probably put barriers, but whose responsibility it is. And it went from the city to the county to the railroad. And I honestly never read anything about who ended up saying it was their responsibility. It was one of those, they passed the buck all around, and because no one wanted to take the responsibility, barriers never went up. And so a congressman had introduced a bill that now is in effect, that you now must put barriers around open pits. But that was an issue even before the bus crash. The city of Alton was already having meetings on that.
Okay, so they were already trying.
Yeah, well, they're asking the question, but trying would be like they were going to put it up. But they were saying, no, it's not us, it's the county. No, it's the state. No, it's the railroad. It was just like being tossed around.
Good Lord. Many more tried to get a piece of the pie as well. Ruben Perez, driver of the Dr. Pepper truck, sues his former employer. U.S. Border Patrol agent John R. Swires, who was called to help save children from the flooded bus, filed a suit in 1991 alleging that he suffered leg injuries and permanent mental and emotional distress. he was seeking $3.4 million from Valley Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola paid an estimate of $4.5 million for each death, and the survivors $500,000 to $900,000. The bus manufacturer paid $950,000 for each death. Okay, and it was $500,000 for those that survived?
It was arranged. Remember, once again, people are getting different amounts, and that's what's called lawsuits. So some are getting millions, some are getting. Survivors got anywhere from $500,000 to $900,000. I know Alex got $350,000, but some of those numbers may have been like because they bought him stuff.
Okay.
And so like the amount may have been higher, but like for Alex, they bought him a car, they got him an apartment. And for other people, like you said, oh, we got you this and that. So maybe those amounts were a little higher, but I'm sure that they subtracted that.
Right. Okay, you would have gotten this much, but I bought you this, that. It's got to come out of somewhere.
Yeah, so maybe 5 to 9 is probably for survivors, but you're looking, 1 to 0.2 to a little more millions for, the ones that died in the accident.
Okay. Some community members expected those receiving settlements to lend money to them. This caused estrangement between the recipients of the settlements and other community members. Okay, do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I heard, and just to go a little further, I read a report that the priest of their parish, other priests were like, well, you're going to get an upgrade in your church because all this money's coming in. And it just seemed like that's the comment you make to someone who's dealing with that. But yeah, there was people, like, oh, you're too good, or, now, you're forgetting about us. And then, when you're looking at it, like, some people would call it blood money. Like, how dare you accept that money? Because that's your, you got money because your child died.
Right.
How can you accept it? And people would call it blood money. And you're giving money to a lot of people who never had that much money. So that later becomes an issue as far as like, and it's the same story really, not just with them, like with lottery winners who don't know, like how to handle money. Like you can buy $1 million house, but you got to keep paying taxes, and that money is just one check and that's all you're ever going to get. And there's all kinds of things that spiral out, and people would like, oh, see, that's what you get. And, but people that just didn't know and had never been exposed to money or to all these things. And inside the city, it got torn apart because there was donations going in, and what's the mayor doing with those donations? And
yeah, that's a whole other story that I also have on here. But, basically, I mean, just so the viewers will understand, some of these families that got millions of dollars, they bought these huge houses, these mansions, and that's great. Power to them. Well, every time you own property, you have to pay the taxes. They spent so much of their money that they couldn't afford to pay their tax, and they lost the house or their houses. So that is very sad. So now maybe I don't know what they have to show for it, but I couldn't tell you. But also, one of them in particular, and I'm not sure I want to mention his name because my cousin did time in prison, right? While he was in there, one of the survivors was in there as well for something with drugs. I don't know the details. I don't care to know the details, but all I know is that he was in there. He got locked up for that. And he's like, I didn't understand. He already had a lot of money. Well, anyhow, eventually he was released and he went back to Mexico. And I do have the name. I just don't want to mention it. Others who have sued in connection with the accident include nearly 24 rescuers, the bus driver, long-lost relatives of the victims, the Coca-Cola truck passenger, and some Coca-Cola employees that were working at the warehouse and weren't even at the scene. Carmen Ramirez's daughter, Michelle, was one of the 21 students that did not survive the accident. Her 2 ex-husbands also sued in hopes for a fat payday. One of them got it. The court ordered Ramirez to pay Serafio Canales, Michelle's biological father, nearly $1 million. Even though he had been an ex-convict wanted for a parole violation, and according to Ramirez, Canales had not seen or helped support their daughter in years.
He wasn't the only one. There were several other stories of like people I passed by and have psychological problems.
Yes. Bogus claims, well, I understand some of them are scarred, but that was your job.
I remember reading about it because I was a paramedic. And I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't ever remember hearing anybody ever suing for going to an accident. And I know it was horrible. I mean, maybe individually we've seen horrible things, like one person, two person. Yeah, I know it was beyond what normally you would see.
By the end of the year, 350 lawsuits were filed. I want to talk about the Wackenhut Corporation security guard who faked an attack, Mr. Alexander Murillo. Can you walk us through that? Because I know in detail, but you explain things better.
When I was researching it, I first read the actual story. I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. And then I kept researching and I found out the whole story. But when the first one was like, oh my God, this dude was, I think he was protecting Ruben Perez's house.
Yes, the Ruben Perez, the driver of the Dr. Pepper truck.
He was receiving death threats and getting all kinds, hate mail and people saying, all kinds of derogatory things about him. So Coca-Cola hires him a security guard, and it was the Wackenhut Corporation. And this guy says he's been attacked by some people, that they were gonna throw gasoline on him, and he managed to fight him off in some way. And the cops, unless you take the report, it makes the news, but the cops are like he's like walking them through the assault, and right away they're like, this doesn't make sense.
It's not adding up.
Yeah, and eventually they find out that he was just trying to sue Coke for being put in that situation, but he made the whole thing up.
Yeah, and so basically he wanted a piece of the pie, and he faked, because apparently what I remember from reading is like he ran to the front door of the Perez household, like help me kind of situation, and it's like, oh, these guys drenched me in gasoline, they were gonna light me on fire. It's like, well, why did they light you on fire? They were trying to light it, but the wind kept blowing it and kept turning it off. It's like, okay, and then it's like the way he explained it, like
how he fought him off.
But okay, what? You were here, and it wasn't adding up eventually. Okay, I made that shit up.
Yeah, and what is really funny is he does this, and right away the cops are like, why would they if they're angry at Ruben Perez? Let's just we give it. There's people angry at him. Why would they attack you? We should be interviewing Ruben Perez right now about being attacked.
Right.
What beef did they have with you? I imagine knocking you out so they can get in, but not spending the time to beat you up and try to light you on fire.
Okay, yeah. I guess getting millions sounded really yummy to him. I get it. Now, Mr. Ruben Perez goes to court. Perez's court trial is a bit of a fiasco. Hidalgo County District Attorney Rene Guerra went after Perez. Defense attorney Joseph A. Connors subpoenaed attorneys of Valley Coca-Cola. He accused them of passing notes to Rene Guerra. He alleged that his sources, whom he did not identify, said Valley Coca-Cola was telling Guerra which questions to ask. Guerra then responds like, I've been doing this for years. Why would I need their help? Well, eventually, the driver was acquitted. Connors said in an interview shortly after the verdict, better brakes, and there would be no dead children. Better bus, and there'd be no dead children. His lawyers turned their attention to settling the score with his former employer, Coca-Cola.
I interviewed Guerra. He never mentioned that. And it's funny, when I was speaking to him, it didn't dawn on me like he lost a case. Like I'm asking him about a case that he lost. And then that was his first reaction, as you know, I lost that case. He never mentioned any of that. So I don't know. I can posit a theory that basically Ruben Perez, I don't know what they made back then, $20,000 a year. So I think that Connors may, whether it's true or not, may be using, the theory that basically, well, if people want to make money off this case, it can't be Ruben Peña's fault.
Ruben
Perez, excuse me. It can't be Ruben Perez's fault because he only has so much money. Coca-Cola has endless supply of money. So I think his argument in that was to highlight that, saying, well, of course he's going to be found,
Okay, this is the part where everyone at the theater watching the movie is confused and they pull this face. They are also asking the others next to them, what did he just say? It was imperative they found Ruben Perez, the Dr. Pepper truck driver, innocent. Why? Why do you think? Ask yourself, if you were an attorney who would you rather sue? If Mr. Perez was guilty, then the attorneys would have to sue him. How much do you think he made a year financially? Would you rather sue a driver that perhaps maybe made 20 grand a year? Or would you rather sue Coca-Cola, a billion-dollar industry? Make sense? So, okay, so what you're saying is that it was imperative that they found him innocent. Because me as a lawyer, you're you, and we have Coca-Cola. Why would I want to sue you? You don't have any money.
Yeah,
So if you're innocent, if you're guilty, then we have to sue you. But if you're not guilty, we could sue Coca-Cola.
You know, and I'm not saying that's what happened, but I can see the logic in that argument because, I mean, honestly, the buck would have stopped there, right? I mean, I'm sure lawyers would have tried, but it would have been a little bit more difficult than it was after he's found not guilty. Because if he's not at fault, then his story of the brakes not working means that Coke didn't keep up that truck, meaning it's Coke's fault, and therein lies the money.
And that makes a lot of sense.
It does.
So I think one person that would be able to answer that is maybe, I mean, not that he would tell you, is maybe the judge, but we're not going to go there. Did you ever interview him? Okay.
Yeah, yes, I did.
Okay.
I won't tell you what he said because he said he wasn't sure he could speak to us off the record. If he could still speak to us because he wasn't sure what he was bound by.
Okay.
So we did talk to him. And I just want to add that the bus was built to specs of that time. They were legal, like that's, you know, they weren't in violation of nothing. They were legal, like they built it to, you know, what the standards of the time were. So, and I understand they sued him, and yeah, it was about they couldn't get out. I understand, but I when I read that, I was like, well, in a sense, they weren't negligent in that way. But I guess some engineer should have said, well, if a kid's ever had to get out of here, you know, I can understand that logic, but it must be said that they didn't, like, it wasn't a bus that was built out of bounds. It was, you know, up to specs of the time.
Right. I don't have the words because it's just, everybody was out to screw everyone. Again, instead of bringing the community together, it tore them apart.
I guess the research was coming to an end. You know, we were like, you know, the last interview Ruben Perez gave, I think it was in the 90s to San Antonio Express, and that's the last time I could ever find him. And a friend of mine, who I don't want to name, reached out because he heard from someone. They told him, just call the bus barn at Mission and ask for him. And apparently he answered and said he had no comment. But I was floored that that's where they found him.
Okay, so the Dr. Pepper truck driver is now a bus driver?
Or working in the maybe, you know, he was at the bus barn. That's all, because we got no more details.
I went all over the place researching this guy, trying to find him. I couldn't find him anywhere, like he disappeared.
This is a few years ago, and I wouldn't doubt if that, you know, maybe that may have spooked him and he moved, or...
I thought he was like the Kaiser Soze of the Valley kind of situation, you know, he disappeared.
That's what was told to me, and I mean, wow. I mean, I was just floored too. He didn't want to comment, and I'm not the kind of person to like push someone, especially in that situation.
Right.
Yeah, so I just was like, well, let it be. You know, we wanted to get a comment out of him, or, you know, tell your side of the story, but he told my friend no comment, and we just let it be. But it was just like, we were like, where?
Well, Mission. Well, so he didn't go far, but
I mean, you know, whether he's still there or not, I don't know. I mean, maybe if he really did want to hide, you know, maybe he would have left. I'm not sure. Like I said, I'm not going to knock on someone's door and force them to talk. I didn't continue to
understandably
pursue that. I heard he didn't want to talk, and that's it. The first place I wanted to do a book signing was the Mission Museum. And I reached out over and over, and I never got. When I first mentioned it, when I was writing it, the director was really in on, oh yeah, can you know, let's put some artifacts, and they were like really into it, but then they changed directors, and then I just kept reaching out and never got back. And then someone else in the city of Mission told me that someone on the board for the museum was on the school board at the time, maybe just didn't want to bring up, dredge up more memories or whatever, have that display or whatever in Mission.
There's some people that want to keep it alive, there's some people that don't.
Yeah.
Like, You're never going to satisfy everyone.
Yeah, I just feel like even doing research when we went to the Mission Library, I was like, let's look at the yearbook, 89's missing. And when you look at their newspaper, the weekly newspaper, there's one article that's in my book, the picture of it, and that's all throughout the whole year. Their magazine had like a year summary and it didn't mention it at all. I can probably understand that maybe the schools told the kids, like, let's not mess with wounds right now. It's too fresh. Right. And I was just kind of like, there's no, reference, but yeah.
Take care, folks. We'll see you next time.